All right, so because we live in a country where the average voter's IQ is less than that of a wet paper towel, it's likely that by the time you see this, that Elmo and his apartheid emerald-fueled empires already gained access to your name, your address, your social security number, all of this stuff about your identity that really matters, and has found a way to monetize it, if not sold it off altogether. Because, I mean, that's what happens when you live in a country where you have middle-aged men naming entire government agencies after 10 and 15-year-old memes. God, this man is cool. But lucky for you, that's where today's sponsor, Aura, comes in. Aura alerts you when your data has been a part of a breach and has leaked onto the dark web. It also gives you fast fraud alerts letting you know when somebody has tried to access your accounts, like, your check-in, your credit, all of that good stuff. It also gives you stuff like password manager, VPN, identity theft protection, all of that good stuff that you need to keep your identity where it belongs, with you. So go ahead and use my link on the screen right now or in the description, whatever you choose, bucko, and go to aura.com/Lil Bill and get 14 days free.
All right, so any of y'all who have watched me for any length of time know that I am not at all shy about where or how I grew up. Not only am I a product of the hood, but I am also a certified and bona fide project baby. I even have the certificate to prove it. Clarence is putting it up on the screen now. So I say that to say that I have a let's just call it a sensitivity toward topics that cover places and people like where and who I grew up with and around. Especially when they're being covered by somebody who looks like they'd be better served talking about K-pop bands. I haven't been shy in the past about vocalizing my disdain for folk like Trap Lord Ross and Adam 22 and DJ Academics and the like. And I mean, because this is the internet after all, where nobody believes in just taking a black man's word on black men's issues because that just sounds too much like right to be real, I and others have to sit here and explain to the non and newly black why those folk are problematic. But you see, that's just it. I've talked in passing in the past about why those channels and their content is individually problematic, but I've never talked about the bigger issue that not only makes channels like Trap Lore and Swamp Stories and insert whoever else in here possible in the first place, but as popular as they are. So that's what we're going to try to unpack today. This isn't really a video about why Trap Lord Ross or DJ Vlad or whoever else is individually a problem. This is a video about why they exist to begin with and why that ultimately is the real problem. So yeah, cue the intro, Clarence. All right, so before we even get into the meat of this topic, let's go ahead and tackle some of the cope that I'm bound to see in the comments so that the rest of y'all don't have to go back and forth with those folk, or if you do, you're doing that on your own time. I ain't got no patience for it. It's just journalism, bro. It's all public information. You're only saying this because Trap Lord Ross is white and... yeah, duh, nigga. That's literally my point. But as with all things, there's much more nuance to it than just whiteness in a vacuum. I'm not going to sit here and tell y'all that you shouldn't watch these folk just because they're white. I'm not even going to tell y'all that they shouldn't be getting into black folks' business in the first place because they are white. I mean, Foreign Man's already did that video. But what I will tell you is that their whiteness coupled with the sensationalized presentation of their subject matter is what makes that content problematic, if you ask me. Trap Lord Ross and channels like his are a product of what I'll call the poverty tour industrial complex. I'm flexing my bachelor's degree on that one. Basically, it's when content creators create a business model that relies on presenting people and places living in poverty and thereby living with the consequences of poverty to an audience that otherwise wouldn't know, let alone care about those folk or those places, which on the surface doesn't sound like a problem. Matter of fact, it actually sounds like a good thing. In fact, most consumers of said content will argue just that point, and that's kind of low-key the kind of self-dry snitching that I'm talking about with y'all, but that's aside from the point. Some would argue that the problem with this kind of content is that it's being done for profit. And I mean, yeah, I get that, but also, you know, I am a YouTube after all. Niggas gotta eat. And we can argue the ethics of such as it's done by mainstream outlets, but the problem specifically with Trap Lore and his ilk, again, goes back to the presentation. These people and places are more often than not presented in a way that is sensationalized for the sake of making them more appealing to those folks' core audience. Again, an audience that would not care about these stories otherwise. Thus, many times, facts and perhaps more importantly, context, if not outright omitted, is obfuscated for the sake of the narrative being presented, or in the most egregious examples, for just the sake of shock value.
Nobody hates Trap Lore Ross more than other white YouTubers talking about hip hop, trying not to be white. Trap Lore Ross. I'm just telling you, it's like, that's not me. That's not me. Oh my God, they think it's me. Damn it. Wait.
Journalism. Because journalism isn't just research, it's framing, it's investigation, it's knowing how to map out stories, etc., finding the story. And so him going to Chicago, he probably, like, academics probably had to go into these places, talk to people, connect dots, etc., to do that fuck shit he did. It's a skill set. Trap Lore Ross is Googling. He's Googling. He's a Google snooper. I don't remember who first said that.
Thus, a perception of these people and places that contributes to keeping them in that state is being perpetuated by the very media that was at least nominally intended to inform the public on their condition. And that's why the whole, you know, journalism argument, although not technically wrong, is a bit disingenuous if you ask me, because like we'll discuss later, journalism is not really the intent behind either the creation or the consumption of this content. Like, let's just ignore the fact that without even watching the video, I could pick a thumbnail from any one of those channels and give you like 3 or 4 points from any one of the many journalistic codes of ethics being violated off rip. The audience isn't here for information, they're here for entertainment, and these creators know this. Like, take Brandon Buckingham, for example. I'm not going to hold y'all and try to argue that the nigga is, you know, Hunter S. Thompson or somebody. But if you ignore the thumbnails of his videos, they're not egregious. I'd even dare say they're pretty decent, if for no other reason than he actually lets his subjects tell their own stories. But the thumbnail, man, along with the title, the sensationalized manner in which the content is being presented, is the problem. But it's also that presentation that is the reason why you clicked on the joint to begin with. And he and everyone else like him know this.
That's Brandon Buckingham.
I don't know who that is.
Basically, what he does is he runs through the hood, points the camera at. You heard about boy from Philly that died, and they was coming out at the Buckingham boy because I think like maybe it wasn't too long. It was like a day or two before he had did a video where he was going all through Philly with the boy, and he wound up dying. Not now in the video, but like a couple days later, and people were saying, you know, that, you know, you kind of low key narked on him, you know, if you hadn't been, you know, blah 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 blah, and you know he was trying to defend himself, and other people was trying to defend him, and my again going back to what you were saying was, and matter of fact, I was on the call with a company man a couple of days ago, and we was making this point. Is that it's like 10,000 different journalistic codes of ethics, right? And like the first code that you get in almost all of them is to mitigate as much harm as possible.
Right.
In my mind, what I'm thinking is the very least you could have did was wait it out a couple days, put it out like a week or two later, but you had to upload it as soon as possible to get them clicks.
Right.
And that right there, even if, you know, you did go to the source, even if you did, you know, point a camera and, you know, I don't really know how his operation worked, you know, because, you know, a lot of these, you know, they offer you some money to ride along or whatever. And I don't know if that's how he do it. But point is that if the goal was to inform the public,
on which I mean we all know what time it is. But
Right.
if that was your goal, even if you were trying to keep up that appearance, then you could have been more responsible.
I'm looking at this dude's thumbnails, and I just want somebody to find this.
You
cat.
see what I'm talking about?
Oh my fucking god!
But
Wow.
but you
then,
see what
and
I
then he
mean,
got
right?
the nerve to be like, I hate DJ Academics. Well, y'all are all children of academics. I can't believe that shit. Yeah, anyway.
Like, I low-key kind of did the same thing with The Hood Is Dead by showing the faces of a bunch of dead rappers who had literally nothing to do with the joint except for the fact that they so happened to grow up in neighborhoods similar to what I was talking about in that video. But also, I know what you niggas click on. You see how this works, right? The Poverty Tour industrial complex is basically what happened when a bunch of self-proclaimed hip-hop journalists, historians, reviewers, whatever, realized that they stood to gain more by not necessarily covering hip-hop itself, but all of the shady stuff that happens in and around the industry, which then just devolved into pointing a camera at street beef and cashing in on the AdSense checks. The next wave of Poverty Tour agents saw the lane that folk like Academics and Vlad and No Jumper and even Trap Lore made and just dropped the whole hip-hop pretense altogether and went 10 toes down straight into ride-alongs and on-the-street interviews in places most of their viewers fear to tread themselves. But here's the thing, Trap Lore, Ross, and all those other folk, they are not the first, not even on the internet, to make a bag off of black bodies. They're just the biggest names in the game right now. Like, again, remember I did a video a while ago talking about the end of the diss track and how Academics first came to prominence based off of the back of that whole Warren Chirac channel that I don't even know is up anymore. And the reason why he got away with it was because he did it under the guise of, again, hip-hop journalism, even if half the people and topics that he and all the rest of those covered could only be seen as such in the loosest definition of it.
And a lot of times people can be so far away from the action that they don't actually have to deal with any repercussions of what they're putting out. Academics' Warren Chirac channel had a similar impact, right? Here is the most exciting form of new subgenre in hip hop. You have all these artists saying these things in the songs. Academics is sitting in Jersey covering it, talking about it. I would say irresponsibly. I would say someone with the name DJ in front of his name knows what he's doing. The virality of those conversations, to me, shows that there was an interest. And so people's moral position on how they look at what it means to, how'd you describe it again? I like the way you said that again. Mitigate as much
harm as possible.
Mitigate as much harm as possible. That is a fluid thing. I think Black Death is profitable from a global standpoint, and it's been at the foundation of the economy of Western civilization for 1,000 years, 500 years. You know,
poverty tourism isn't even new, but it's something that goes back at least as far to the 19th century in London, when the upper crust would spend their holidays spelunking through the slums and ghettos of the East End. And this is something you see all throughout Western, even global media, the elite's fascination with the way that the lesser half lives, to the point that that very fascination has itself been depicted in stories like The Prince and the Pauper, for example. I'll get into the why a little bit later on, but for now, let's go back to the whole presentation thing, specifically what I mean by sensationalism. Sensationalism is a tactic used by journalists, and more often than not, their editors, honestly, to invoke an emotional response in their audience that ideally drives up engagement. This can be wording a headline to make an otherwise trivial topic appear more important than it actually is, or using the same headline to lean into the controversial nature of said topic, or even, the good old bait and switch, tricking your audience into thinking you're about to spill some scorching hot tea when it's really just, lukewarm milk. So yeah, it's basically every YouTube thumbnail you've ever seen since the apocalypse days. The most obvious issue with sensationalized media is the distortion of facts, specifically in the case of hood tour media. More specifically than that, the over and misrepresentation of crime in Black America.
Journalism. I don't watch a lot of his videos. I've only watched I may have watched a handful of his videos once upon a time, just because I remember the Florida shit. The boys in Florida that were getting shot, that were shooting each other up. I may have watched him do that video because that was my first introduction to him, and the story was so surreal that I could not listen. What NAD interview he conducted in that? What NAD connection he made in that? He is just regurgitating news, interviews, and work of other people and putting it into one package. That nigga's he's a clip farmer. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, so technically you could call that journalism because you are putting together a story, but considering the dynamics, considering what's at stake, considering who's at risk, I don't want to hear that shit. And I don't want to hear for academics either, but at least I can connect the dots on academics doing journalism to get his story. Trap Lord Ross could never go to the places he talks about and get the type of response that he gets. And not even get the type of response he gets, like get real insight that isn't Googled or pulled from message boards. You know what I'm saying? It's research, I'll give him that. But he's not providing any type of like true insight or analysis or breakthrough information or whatever. He is a mother bird chewing up some shit and spitting into the mouths of his fans. But because it's gangster shit, it's black bodies, black male bodies specifically dying, there's a desire to hear those stories.
I've talked in the past about the way race and class color our perceptions of crime and the nature thereof. But in summation, we greatly over-exaggerate the impact and even prevalence of so-called violent crimes in America, even in the hardest hit areas of the country. If y'all want the full tea on that, I suggest y'all go watch The Hood is Dead that I mentioned earlier, but I'm not going over all of that again. But one thing I did point out in that video is that not only have homicides among all other crimes, violent and otherwise, been on a steep and steady decline since the 70s, but homicide accounts for less than 1% of the total crime rate in the US and is always in the single digits in those big dangerous cities that you hear about on the nightly news. I've also cited studies in the past that say that 50% of the total gun crimes committed in the average American city are committed by 0.6% of the population of that city. Furthermore, that same 0.6% represents the same percentage of gun crime victims in the average US city as perpetrators. So again, this is all just street niggas doing street stuff. But that's not the way that it's framed by mainstream media outlets, and most definitely not by the internet. Instead, we promote this narrative of a violent crime wave sweeping the country's urban centers, threatening to hop on the highway down to the spanking new McNeighborhood out in the sticks unless we build a big stupid wall to keep the Mexicans out of our country while drug and sex traffickers cross the border into theirs. Oh yeah, y'all ain't know that part, did you? And that's kind of my point, bucko.
Overall crime stats in America continue to go down, but the portrayal of crime on the news continues to go up because there's interest in it. People want to, people they gravitate towards a black and white view of the world in a lot of senses, and a lot of times it reinforces their own stereotypes.
What I'm saying is, for as much good as the internet has done, particularly in giving us all greater access to information that most of us reasonably can consume, and so we just ignore most of it for the sake of maintaining our own implicit biases, it's also compromised journalistic integrity by removing the almighty editor from the publication process. Internet journalism is basically just one big just trust me, bro. And again, because we are inundated with way more information than we could ever possibly handle, most of us just kind of do that. The just trust me, bro part. It's also made the journalistic marketplace so deep and wide that you practically have to clickbait just to get enough engagement to make your content worth its creation. So not only do you get a gross misrepresentation of facts by mainstream outlets many times, but a lot of independents just straight up get stuff wrong with little to no consequences because the facts were never the fishhook to begin with. It was the sensational nature of the topic itself, which now brings me back to this nigga. Look, I'm going to try not to spend too much time talking about Trap Lord Ross specifically because, like I said, he individually is not really the issue that I want to talk about. I'm not going to sit here and act like I even haven't fallen for some of his thumbnails, but what I will say is that when I saw that the face behind this one right here was a white British man, I ain't even gonna lie to you. It made all the sense in the world to me why he would even go this route.
My issue with, we'll take hip hop serial killer for as an example with Trap Lord Ross. The hip hop in the hip hop serial killer is the part I don't like because I think a lot of these things are really crime stories.
Is there an argument to be made that audience isn't necessarily a hip hop audience, but audience
that's 100%
is
what it is. That's what see. That's where my issue is.
Right.
He's framing it as it's a hip hop thing. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I don't know. I didn't watch. It's like 3-4 hours. I didn't watch the whole. I got 20 minutes in. And I was like, I don't want to see this. You know,
right?
No disrespect to Trap Lord Ross, but at the same time, all disrespect to Trap Lord Ross because he put hip hop on the title. You know what I mean? Like so.
Right.
I got into it. I'm like, this isn't the energy that I'm on. Right. But that is the problem with it to me. Because people are rappers or because people like hip hop in a lot of situations or because people are affiliated with rappers or whatever, they will label this a hip hop problem. It's like black on black crime.
Right.
Well, if black people live near each other and they commit crimes and now they're saying it was black on black crime. They don't call it white on white crime.
Right.
Well, people kill people who are there, they know. That's how it goes, generally speaking. Right. That's what the difference is with white supremacy. White supremacy will go on a hunt. They will start hunting people they don't like. You know what I mean? That's different. That's a different type of thing. And so a lot of these are like you're dealing with a population of people who generally come from underserviced communities, who are in a cycle of institutionalized poverty, in my opinion. You know, in this country, and you're putting a camera on their actions and calling it. And connecting it with something that literally exists to quell those things.
My issue with Trap Lord, aside from the fact that according to people who know much better than I do, I'm not from Chicago or New York, so I really don't know better. According to them, he regularly gets stuff wrong because he relies on subreddits instead of actually speaking to the source, is that his presentation is sensationalized to the point of often being straight up misleading at times, which itself is pretty suspect. But I mean, look at who he hangs around. For one, at least when I found him, he presented himself as a hip hop historian, which, okay, not a problem in itself. I mean, anytime I see white folks presenting themselves as any type of authority on hip hop, again, the antennas go up, man. But that's aside from the point. This is also despite the fact that the history he covered rarely went back further than, like the late 2000s. His old content, with all that said, is inoffensive and actually pretty good and interesting. At least the stuff that actually does pertain to hip hop is. And that's where the issue arises. You can see as time went on, he began to lean more into the true crime element of his subjects to the point that these days he's more likely to cover Lil Durk's alleged body count than his discography, which he has. Talking about Durk's body count. Alleged again.
People just need to be humanists. People just need to listen to music. Like, people need to listen to rap music. My main problem with Trap Lord Ross is I've never heard him talk about rap music once. Like not once. Have I ever heard him talk about a bar or a beat? And maybe he does. I don't know. I've only watched a couple of his videos because like they literally make me sick. Like I literally get like, ugh, like going into Spencer's Gifts at the mall. Like I just get kind of sick and I just want to go home. It's the decentering from the music that is the problem. And it's maybe a technological thing because I don't think this is a white thing or a black thing. Right? I think anybody who has said, would you like to hear a 45-minute discussion of somebody rambling words over and over again? Or would you like to hear about a couple of cool gangsters who caught and killed a couple other cool gangsters? There's the reptile part of our brain.
Right.
But the thing is, the reptile part of our brain exists in a systemically racist society, so that's the problem. It's like you have to work hard. You can't just say like, I don't know, sex sells, violence sells, so that's just what I do. Like you have to actively go against it.
Dude doesn't even cover rappers half the time, but teenage toy toters that are tangentially connected to figures in the hip hop world, like T-Roy and K.I., for example. And yeah, all of that did give me the ick, but it wasn't enough for me to actively dislike the nigga. It wasn't until I saw, again, this thumbnail that I realized that this nigga was the type of nigga that would probably brag about me calling him nigga. Again, I want to be transparent and tell y'all up front that I ain't even bothered to watch the joint. I was so put off by it. So I don't know how it was framed in the video. For all I know, maybe he did do a better job than the feds in actually giving the facts on the story, which I mean, it really ain't that hard considering, I mean, you know, COINTELPRO and all that. But the actual content of the video itself doesn't really matter in this case. It's the presentation of said content. It's the phrase serial killer, hip hop serial killer at that.
You're not supposed to do exploitative things with your work.
Right.
You're just not. You're not supposed to do a story or a research project or whatever where you are exploiting the problems and pain of your subjects for your own personal gain. And there is no frame through which to look at Trap Lord Ross's work and not see that that's exactly what he's doing. There's clear efforts to sensationalize what's happening. There's clear leaps in logic when he calls King Von a serial killer. You know what I'm saying? There's clear efforts being made to emphasize and play up the most sensational parts. And especially because he's never actually talking to anyone directly, these people aren't getting money off of his work. They're not getting directly any type of direct financial gain. He's not getting permission. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And he also doesn't have to deal with any consequences because his ass ain't even here. Is he here in the States? Did he move here?
No, he's still in. I don't know. I assume he's still in England.
Yeah. He is collected. He is a vaudevillian barker where he gets his steps up his stage and he brings out his black freaks and says, look at the freaks. Look at what they're doing. Look at this. Look at that. And like intrinsically, I think even people that watch him regularly understand that there's a problem there, but they want to see.
Like, let's not beat around the bush, y'all. That's why this joint has 15 million views to date. I don't know how much a white Englishman understands about hood politics, although based on past videos I've seen of his, he at least should know how framing Vaughn this way is irresponsible at best, to the point that most honest-to-God journalists that I could think of would probably call it unethical. I'm not going to sit here and cape for Vaughn, y'all. I ain't doing that. But again, if you have the barest knowledge of how gangs and gang killings actually work, and you also know how serial killer psychology works, then you already know how and why I say that this framing is purposefully misleading. Again, irresponsible at best, and in my opinion, straight up unethical, especially for someone who calls themselves a hip-hop historian. But again, this is the nigga who offered uncensored photos of bullet-ridden black bodies on the paid tier of his Patreon. So I don't really expect much from him in terms of ethics. Again, I'm not that kind of channel, but if you do know what a serial killer actually is, and you also know the politics of street shooters and shootings, then you already understand how and why people like me felt a sort of way about it. And if you don't, go ask somebody who knows better. I'm sure y'all are bitching in the comments now. I'm just as sure somebody will be right along to check y'all for it. Remember, this channel is basically the hood nigga haven if you haven't figured it out yet. But why though? Why did Trap Lord not only know this thumb would work, but would probably be the most viewed video on his channel to date? Why has he and others like him been able to make a living off of what's basically the poverty tourist equivalent of Bat Boy Lives? For that matter, why are hood vlogs and drive-alongs not only such a successful but sustainable business model on this godforsaken app? More so than what I do here, I'll tell y'all that much. Yeah, I know where this is going, man. It's racism, dog. Before we get into that, though, we have to understand that race and class do not exist separate from each other. The whole point of race, at least the way we have understood race since the transatlantic period, is to justify stratification and thereby exploitation of those who occupy the lower strata, in this case, Black and even indigenous American people. Literal entire societies, including this one, for y'all that's in America, like me. So, well, literally, if you're anywhere west of the prime meridian, every society on this side of the globe, as well as Europe for that matter, are built on the concept of non-white people being something less than fully human. Thus, we are unworthy of humane treatment by white people. But this was never undone or even really given anything deeper than window dressing and kente scarves every June. Thus, Western society even today is inherently hostile to non-whiteness, Blackness especially, to the point that said hostility functions as something of a fulcrum around which our society pivots. In other words, when all else fails, you can always form a lynch mob for folk to rally around. And you know what I mean? If you don't believe me, I talked about this a few years ago in regards to the rise of MAGA, but here's the thing that people either forget or don't care to mention about MAGA, is that it is only the latest iteration of the infamous Southern strategy around which American conservatism built itself after realignment, which it can be argued was just to that point the latest form of the eugenics movement from the early 20th century, which itself was just manifest destiny with pseudoscience to back it up. Y'all kind of see where I'm at. This is who and what we've always been. That's where I'm going. Long story short, the Southern strategy was the method by which the GOP reorganized itself in the wake of the rights revolution of the 50s and 60s. The plan was essentially appealing to the so-called silent majority of Americans who were discomfited with the rapid rise in status that not only Black folk, but Latinos, queers, women, etc. gained in the prior decades. But GOP strategists understood that you couldn't just call a hard R anymore and expect it to fly in polite company. Instead, you had to wage a proxy war against the undesirables by way of things like anti-busing, the drug war, the war on crime, the pro-life movement, while also employing dog whistles like Thug and Welfare Queen to let folk know what type of time you was on, but also give yourself enough plausible deniability to pass the sniff test, you know what I mean? But why though? That's the thing I don't ever remember seeing a lot of people ask. Why was and is anti-Blackness such a reliable rallying cry to the point that the right, for as many isms and schisms that exist within it, are able to put those aside and come together in a way that the left, even if you do want to exclude the liberals from that equation, never has, all in the name of anti-Blackness? It's because racism, and more specifically anti-Blackness, is literally baked into the fabric of our society to the point that it crosses the political spectrum, to the point that it characterizes the far ends of that spectrum. Yes, both right and left, dog. This I covered 2 years ago, and the left has a whiteness problem, so I'm not going to bother entertaining any more white tanky cope over here.
You know, I mean, it sounds like, I mean, the thing about all these things, right, even the Constitution, right, you know, journalistic principles, et cetera, you know, you described it as what it is to a degree where it's like part of your job is to mitigate as much harm as possible. Well, that all depends on your perspective of what harm is. What harm is. That part of it, to me, is a moral position, and morals are defined by, at least in my opinion, morals are connected to the energy of an era. You know, people who were alive during the slave trade looked at it as just a system. This is the world around them. They didn't feel inherently immoral, or that they were doing something immoral. And if you look at the prevalence and the gravity of social media at this point, a lot of these people are are committing crimes on their phone and showing the world.
Yeah.
You know, I can see an argument where someone has a perspective that it's important to put together certain types of sensationalized videos, thinking less about the on-the-ground consequences for the people that they're putting in these videos or who are affiliated with them, and more about this system of these people, of people who are committing crimes online, who might be
Right.
inciting more crimes. You
Right.
know, I don't necessarily have that same point of view, but I can see it.
Every major American institution, from policing to education to organized religion, hell, to the U.S. Constitution itself, are and were built with the express intended purpose of establishing and reaffirming the primacy of the white race, specifically straight white men, at the direct expense of indigenous and black Americans. So no, nigga, it's not just a class thing. It's a class and race thing. But the reason that you hyper-focus on the class part is that that's the only part that really affects you directly. So then again, it begs the question, how leftist are you really? Are you just another disgruntled capitalist using leftism as a means to access the privilege that... You know what? I did this already. Watch the old Jones, man. America was never great to us because it was never meant to be great to us. So when people like me hear stuff like make America great again, or worse than that, take America back, nigga, take America back from who exactly? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Or actually, I do know who you're talking about now, and that's the problem. We hear and we see people rallying around racism is what I'm saying. And that's especially true in the most recent election cycle. Argue whatever you will about why Harris didn't get the votes and why Biden likely wouldn't have either. Matter of fact, he probably would have done worse than Kamala did, to keep it a buck. But it's getting harder and harder to argue after already seeing what a Trump presidency would look like 8 years ago, and after all the things he did back then, and after all the things he said leading up to this election, and after seeing him follow through on a lot of that bigotry, even if not the primary motivator, was some type of motivator for why folk voted for this dickhead again. That bigotry primarily targeted toward dark-skinned people. And understand something, I think this is where our understanding of anti-blackness is limited. When people hear racist or bigoted or anti-black, they immediately go to a Klan hood and a swastika and a goose step, which I mean, considering the last election cycle, again, bet. But it's not just that. As with any construct, racism is a spectrum that often gets ignored for the binary ends of it, the most extreme parts on both sides. On one end, you have your drunk uncle who spray painted the F slur on the gay interracial neighbor's Prius last Thanksgiving. And then on the other end, you got stuff like black.com. And don't act like y'all don't know what I'm talking about. The stuff y'all be posting on it, that was half the reason why I got off of Twitter to begin with. I don't need to see no more white coochie lips, man. I'm so serious about that. What I'm saying is, on one end there is vilification, and on the other end is exoticism. But both come from the same tree. Blackness is not standard in the society. It's not conventional. It's not even normal, according to white supremacy. And again, black people, according to white supremacy, aren't actually people. We exist for exploitation. That's it. And for some folk, that exploitation manifests as fetishization. My point is, when you see a black person, more than likely, the first thing you see is black before you see person. And that evokes any number of responses, from hostility to fascination, even infatuation. But your response, again, more than not, is always going to be toward their otherness and not their humanity, because you don't see yourself in them. Your response is not to the person, but your response is to the construct that person represents and your feelings toward that construct. But get this, that ain't even your fault. I've made this argument in the past, and it's a hill that I'm willing to die on. Being racist doesn't necessarily make you an inherently bad person. I think this is the big reason why a lot of folk avoid confronting their anti-black or anti-queer, misogynistic, or whatever other issue that they got going on, because we limit our understanding of such concepts to just hatred. So therefore, I can't be X-phobic if I don't hate X identity, but that's the rub. Just because you don't hate it don't mean that you respect it, let alone do you see the humanity in it, let alone do you see its equality to your identity. The problem is in reducing bigotry to its extremes. Either you're an ally or you're a goose-stepping Nazi again. Those are the only two options you get. And then when you point out that just not being a goose-stepping Nazi with SS bolts pinned to your lapel isn't good enough, people throw a fit, because again, we live in a society where nothing matters until it impacts me directly. We don't critique equally harmful reductions of non-standard identities. So going back to the black.com example, God, I hope this joint stays monetized. The reason why you can build a whole website built around tiny white girls getting dug out by big black bucks is because of the way black men's sexuality has and continues to be understood and thereby depicted by and in popular culture.
It would not be hard to find a couple 100,000 black men that have been assaulted by white women based completely on the experience you talked about. And why is that? And let alone white men. And foreign men has talked about fucking having white dudes come up to him in the gym being like, "Can you fuck my wife?" You know what I'm saying? Like, it's
that's real. No, that's
real.
That is real.
And that's also connected to an Ahmaud Arbery, right? Where he's running, jogging, and got off his path at the wrong time, looked in an empty house, and now is being chased by two white men who are playing vigilante and end up murdering him in the process. You know, what we're talking about goes back to Fanon, Du Bois, all the, let me name drop the motherfuckers for y'all, but y'all know what I'm talking about. It goes back to profiling. It's the way blackness is imagined and has always been imagined since slavery. Black bodies in general carry all this meaning, and most of it is negative. And it's not just Trap Lore Ross. It's a history. It's a historical depiction of blackness as other, as inhuman, as dangerous, as corrupt, as always sexually available. You know what I'm saying?
As exotic.
As everything but worthy of respect and dignity and human rights. As existing for our consumption and commodification.
Y'all might think it's flattering to assume that all black dudes are just walking around with a t-ball bat swinging between their legs, but even if true, it reduces black men to just being that, and it reflects in people's behavior toward us. I've talked in the past in several videos now about my own experiences of being fetishized and even objectified based on my blackness alone, and not just by white women, but white men, straight white men at that. But that's another video that I have no interest in doing. Ask Feek to do it. Matter of fact, one time I was actually, if we're gonna keep it a buck, low-key kind of assaulted by a white John. But, and this isn't me caping for the snow bunnies or anything, she just didn't know better because she had never been taught better. Her understanding of black masculinity came almost exclusively from rap videos and pornography. Yeah, so there you have it. I'd even argue that half the reason for that site's popularity is the taboo of these inherently hypermasculine sex bots that we call black men having their way with what are, again, typically depicted to be very petite white women who themselves aren't supposed to be this sexual, and if they are, it's because they're deviants. And if and when they are deviant, it is only the inherent sexual prowess, even deviance of the black man that can satisfy them. It's either that, or once they have been conquered,
I am so lonely,
by a black man, many times reluctantly, it turns them out. You know, once again, that whole once you go black thing and whatever. Again, this ain't that video, but there's a sense of power I think a lot of white men get from living vicariously through the bodies of black men. And I feel like there was a whole movie made about that. Well, c'est la vie. This is in sharp contrast to black women who historically are depicted as nothing but a bunch of dick desperate Jezebels, which is why we need to outlaw abortion, of course, to punish them for their promiscuity. Yeah, you see how I tied that in, right? Like, I'm so serious. Give me a call, BET. I swear, giving me a show would be a lot better than just running House of Pain reruns and black trauma porn all day. Which I guess brings me to another non-counterpoint that I didn't even bother to address earlier. Well, what about all of those non-black people that they cover? Well, what about them, nigga? Y'all don't watch those videos. That's kind of my point. Go look at any of those channels, and the least view videos over there almost always are the ones with white faces and the thumb that aren't already famous. But why though? Because the majority of people watching these Johns aren't black. Now, I don't need a survey to tell me that. It's just, you know, it's simple mathematics, guys. These folk, like their creators, are fascinated by blackness, a very specific experience and depiction of blackness at that. Like Trap Lord Ross even says so himself at one point. The problem again is that media has normalized this depiction to the point that it is seen, even by a lot of black folks, as the standard of black experience by those who don't know better. This type of content also dehumanizes that experience by again leaning into its sensational nature. I'd even argue and say that the dehumanization has itself been normalized by not just content creators but mainstream media. The value of blackness is in its otherness, according to media. That otherness is what fascinates most white people. Blackness is alien. Blackness is unconventional. It's exotic even for a lot of folks.
The hardest thing to do is to figure out, like, especially for white listeners, like, there really is an internal impulse to believe that everything belongs to you. And I know that's like a conspiracy theory about white people. And after a life of being a white person, I can tell you that, like, it's true. It is actually in our mindset. It's not like a conscious thought, but it's like the subconscious feeling. So, like, I think that has a lot to do with it, because the more exotic it seems, there is some degree to which that's the more you want to feel you can possess the thing. And that's going back to that unkind interpretation of white people enjoying hip hop, you know, the feeling that, like, oh, I can't go into this space. I can't know what this is. Oh, I had a nice high school so that this person had a school that shut down its after school programs. And then because of that, hip hop was created. I want to go into that space and I want to participate in it. So I remember watching Boys in the Hood with me and like 5 other of my other white suburban friends. And we'd all watched the movie a couple of times. And we were with a friend of mine, you know, like a new kid who just showed up. And he just goes, "Why are they all drinking beer out of such big bottles?" and we laughed at him so hard because we knew what a 40 was. We knew what Old English was. And it's like, why were we laughing? We had never had a 40. We had never been in a store where they sold a 40. We had never seen anybody drink a 40 in real life. Like, we knew that that's what they said they did. But there's something about that moment where, like, because there is a real degree to which it's intoxicating. Anytime you're given a code and you get to decipher that code, you don't always think about where that code comes from. So just like, why are they drinking beers out of such large bottles? Like, when you know that answer, you feel cool. And like, I guess we must have felt some sense of possession over that that we didn't earn because we just saw it in a movie.
That said, again, exoticism is just dehumanization by another name. And this has very real world consequences, like the disproportionate way in which black crime is covered by the news compared to actual incidents of such in the same areas. This I talked about in the New Jack City video, so I'm not going to repeat myself here. But the question we're asking again is, how does anti-blackness tie back to our love for poverty tourism to the point that white men with mustaches have basically become Don Diva for Generation Crash Out? Like I said in How the Hood Was Commodified, I forgot which one, just watch them all, bruh. The music industry doesn't really sell music. It sells a brand, an image, and more often than not, that brand is some form of deviance. It's even taboo many times. The most obvious example I can give y'all is the hypersexualization of black women in music, rap music especially. Y'all can talk me down all y'all want about this, but Iggy Azalea could have never made WAP. Or, I guess she could have made it, but then we'd have all clowned her for blackfishing again, which is kind of my point, right? We just wouldn't have accepted it from her because that's not the way that white women's sexuality typically is depicted in media. Look at the way Sabrina Carpenter has been received despite what she doing being relatively tame compared to some of the stuff that I just saw on basic cable being done by black girls with no names in the mid 2000s. Matter of fact, Lana Del Rey built her whole gimmick on her alleged sexual deviance, but that's what made it work. The taboo of a white girl her way to the top. If that were Rihanna or SZA, hell, I'm gonna even go ahead and say Doja Cat. It would have been just another Tuesday. Hell, Summer Walker has entered the chat. The same can be said of black men in the same genre, but just as much as black sexuality, black criminality is sensationalized and commodified in hip hop music, specifically that of men, and that's kind of where I'm getting at.
You know, like if it's a crime thing, to me, it becomes problematic when you put a different label on it, because then now, and that reinforces what people think about, especially people who are outside of hip hop when they think of hip hop. But this is like, you know, there's a lot of things like this. This is like Gangland, you know, the docu-series that looks at, you know, Bloods and Crips. I had know, one of the writers for DX came to me when I was editor-in-chief and was like, I want to do a story on the Bloods and Crips. And I was like, why? He was like, because we could win a Pulitzer Prize. And I'm like, no, we're not going to do that. We are real people in LA. If we do something wrong, we do something, people will really pull up.
Yes.
You know, we don't need the creative director having to worry about, you know, her walk to the car. We don't need these interns getting pulled into something that, no, we are not going to do that. It's a story that's always going to be of interest, sure, but there are real repercussions, and a lot of times they're unpredictable, right? And so, you know, I think all of that plays into people's the fetishization of black death and black bodies in a lot of ways, and we see that way more outside of hip hop than we do within hip hop. But hip hop is a vehicle that has a lot of interest in it because it is the music of our generation, the culture of our generation. And when
I've argued in the past that half the reason people listen to street rap is the same reason we ride roller coasters or watch scary movies. It's the thrill of being in danger without having to deal with any real consequences. Some of us are just fascinated with, even exhilarated by the taboo of taking a life, of breaking most society's number one rule, thou shalt not kill. And we're equally fascinated by those who do so and why they do so. But then there's another factor that I think is so blatantly obvious that we have a tendency to forget about, and that's that gangbanging looks cool as hell. Or at least it does for those who are too young or too lame to know better. I'm in my 30s, man. I'm gonna be real. Gangbanging always looked dumb to me. I'm gonna keep it a buck. I can say it. I ain't from the West Coast. Like, I can't really speak to the Midwest or the West Coast, but in the Northeast, we don't really have gang culture the way that a lot of y'all out there do. Like, yeah, we've always had, you know, groups of neighborhood ruffians squabbling over schoolyard crushes and whatnot. And we've also had neighborhood, if not citywide, criminal enterprises like JBM in Philadelphia and Supreme Team up in Queens. But we never had anything like Crips and Bloods or anything like that. Or at least we never had it to that scale. Gangs outside of the Northeast, to me, always came off like, for lack of better phrasing, alternative boys clubs. And that's not meant as any shade. Matter of fact, that's really where a lot of that culture comes from, if you know the history of it, to keep it a buck. What I mean is, in the Northeast, there wasn't that again, for lack of better phrasing, since a brotherhood that LA and Chicago gangs presented themselves as. Gang culture in the Northeast, at least as far as I can remember, has always primarily been presented as a business model first and foremost, a hierarchy by which dope boys could keep their operations running on all cylinders. If you were 20 and older, you didn't claim a set to be a part of, you did it because you wasn't going to be able to push weight on your block unless you did anymore. Again, this is once gangs became a thing over here. And if you were 20 and younger, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and say that it wasn't, for some people, a combination of protection and camaraderie, but half the time niggas did it because it just looked cool. Again, we didn't have Crips and Bloods and GDs and all that until the 90s, and even then it didn't blow up like that until the early 2000s, when that aesthetic was fully commodified by mainstream media. Lil Wayne, The Game in his pre-cornball days, and Dipset especially, if you're from where I'm from. That's why niggas wanted to bang. It wasn't to protect your block from the kids up the street. Hell, there was kids from the burbs repping sets from the inner city, and nobody batted an eyelash, because again, there was never really a gang culture in the Northeast until the media created one for us, and they did so by making it look cool as hell. Truth be told, most of the bangers I knew growing up never really banged insofar as actually putting in any work for their set. They just got their ish kicked in by a bunch of older boys and maybe sold a few nickel bags and 8 balls from time to time, but they wasn't really about no real action, and they weren't trying to be. They got down because you couldn't wear a certain colorway on your J's or tie your Timbs a particular way unless you was down. You couldn't rep certain sports teams or use certain slang if you wasn't. There was a sense of exclusivity to being a gangbanger that until that time didn't really exist in this region, unless again you were just a straight up dope boy. Like, there are no gang affiliates where I'm from. You're either down or you're not. And you're not because you're from the wrong neighborhood, but because you're too square to hang with the cool kids. The gangbangers were the boys with the Pele jackets and the Nextel flip phones from the Boost Mobile commercial. They were the ones that all of the pretty girls with the long lashes and fat asses wanted to talk to, not the losers on the football team like myself, or at least that's what I was led to believe until 2 years after it was too late. Like, damn, Tiff, like, seriously, was the peer pressure that bad? Like, come on. Too late is the story of my life. Again, that's what we were led to believe by folk like, you know, Cameron and Jim Jones, and I can't help but feel like that presentation carried over into poverty tourism that we see today. Even if you can't be a banger, you can learn enough about them to feel tapped in, and then hold that over your friends and crushes as some kind of arcane and forbidden knowledge of coolness. What I'm saying is, a lot of y'all that indulge in this media, y'all, I'm gonna keep it a buck, y'all are losers, lames, fakes, phonies, and stands, but nobody has to know that so long as you can fake the funk, right?
All right, so after watching this joint back, I realized that I probably didn't spend as much time on this section as I should have. And even if I did, I definitely didn't go as hard as I could have. So I'm going to try to rectify some of that right now in light of some. Let's just call them developments. I'll put it that way. So evidently, the Buckingham boy did get shot recently from what else but sticking his nose into somebody else's drawers drawer a few too many times. And I mean, water is wet, sky is blue. I'm not going to give you a medal for poking the bear and finally getting bit, nigga. Now, from what I understand, it wasn't a targeted shooting because, duh, it was just another case of niggas not actually knowing how to shoot. But in the process of digging deeper into the incident, I came across a few subreddits that prove exactly my point about the cornball BS that you cul-de-sac dwelling middle incomers be on when y'all watch this garbage. I saw a bunch of presumably non-black niggas, and if they are black, they're definitely not that kind of black, praising the boy for standing on business and staying solid for not snitching. And that's the ish that I be talking about with you lamos. First of all, Who the F do you think is going to give him a hood pass anymore after they find out he spilled the beans to the pigs? That's not staying solid. That's knowing how and where your bread is getting buttered. It's just good business sense, man. Second, and more importantly, it always makes me grind my teeth when I see or hear civilians talking this way. Like, you mofos wouldn't know a Drake from a steak if it hit you upside the head, but you feel comfortable using all this street language because you heard niggas use it on the internet. Like, for real, stop all of that. It's corny, it's lame, it's any other adjective you want to put to it. Like, believe it or not, we can actually tell who really knows the dirt based on the context with what you use this language. And a failed art teacher getting his cameraman a flesh wound from hosting was basically a Nat Geo special for cornballs like you is not standing on business. It's a nigga sticking his nose where it's neither wanted nor needed by anyone but niggas who cross the street when a black face is coming toward them, and they'll wind up going home and jerking off to the thought of that same black face dicking down the crush that they can't get themselves. And the number of downvotes and replies to niggas who pointed this out that I saw proves the point that I keep coming back to, that everybody want to be black until recess is over. Everybody want to be a gangster until the cops pull up, and then it's back to sobbing on the stand and looking pitiful as possible to avoid getting punished for it.
There's any number of reasons why people obsess over crime, including the 24/7 news cycle and the perception of crime's prevalence in our society. But here's what I found interesting. The true crime genre's overall popularity is primarily driven by women. But have you ever asked yourself why and what specifically are these ladies watching? Well, one 2010 study found that women tended to gravitate towards stories that not only had a female victim, but gave tips on how to avoid such crimes as murder, rape, and kidnapping, as well as delving into the psychology of the perpetrators of those crimes. Some have even argued that our evolutionary instinct for survival is what leads some to obsess over ways to avoid meeting their maker a little too soon.
Like, because it comes from, to be fair, there's the same human like tendency that gets us to watch a Trap Lord Ross video is also what gets us to watch true crime anything. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's also that gets us to watch the Menendez brothers. They got like 4 movies at this point.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? How many Jeffrey Dahmer movies?
I was just thinking about that. Yeah.
You know, it all comes from the same overt, like, human place, which is there's something about safely, vicariously engaging with a dangerous, harmful thing with the internal knowledge that you are still safe. Like, I can observe that is the zoo. It's a fucking tiger right there. Can that nigga jump the gap? Are you sure? Like, when you go to the zoo and you see the lion up on a mountain and there's no cage, my first thought is, first off, I don't even like zoos for this reason, but like, my kids have barely went to the zoo with me. I'm like, this is just some, I know what this, I see the parallels too closely. I don't like this. One of the first things you do is observe the gap. And you say, all right, what? And you say, what's keeping this nigga from jumping and catching me? And then once that's settled in, you just be like, oh, wow, it's a tiger. And that's how they do us. Because you're watching because you know that being black in this country is hard as fuck and produces dysfunction and will lead to, like, young boys shedding their humanity in puberty. Man, that I still get, like, I well up when I think about that shit in Florida. Them boys were hopeless, and that's not unique. That's just a story that comes to mind, because that's every hood, every ghetto has those boys where they have been so disabused from human, like human decency and care, and so exposed to toxic, threatening environments that they just do not operate. They tend not to operate with their own safety and future and forthright. Like, they just, that's don't make sense to them, because everybody they know is either dead or in jail, right? And that is a manifestation of so many things in this country that they don't want to get into, but they can't not notice the effects.
What I found interesting, though, if not at all shocking, was the disparity in women who said that they'd opt for true crime stories over war and gang-focused ones, according to StatsSignificant.com. What I'm saying is, It's completely understandable why a woman would want to use a documentary or even multiple ones to know what to do if they're in such a predicament, and even how to avoid such a predicament at all. What I don't understand, at least at face value, is why someone who has no immediate connection to gang violence outside of the music and the movies that they consume would want, let alone need, to be informed on such things. It's entertainment. Let's stop beating around the bush and just call a spade a spade. Y'all are not watching Trap Lord Ross. Y'all are not watching Brandon Buckingham or Swamp Stories or any of that to be informed or educated. You watch it, we watch it because it entertains us. Like, I'm not going to sit here and hold y'all like there isn't a morbid curiosity that compels one to click on a video titled Hip Hop Serial Killer. I'm not even going to argue that that curiosity is necessarily a bad thing. But what is a bad thing is the real world implications of when that curiosity is actively being curated. The thing with movies, the thing with TV and with video games is that we know that those characters aren't real. We don't have to have an ethical dilemma over the demise of a fictional character or even a biographical one that died before Disco did. We don't have to feel bad about a fatality or a KD ratio unless you're on the wrong side of one, in which case that's grounds for a beatdown if I ever see you in the street. Even with music, there's always that plausible deniability of kayfabe, right? That we can deflect with. It's just lyrics after all. It's just cap. Nobody really knows how much is actually tall tales and how much is true stories. But you can't really do that with a Trap Lord Ross video, though, can you? Based on most of the arguments that I've seen defending him or even academics back in the day, I know most of you niggas understand what I'm saying, even if you can't quite place your finger on it. That's why a lot of y'all deflect with the journalism argument, which, again, even if it's technically accurate, let's be real, that's not why you're watching this. And both you and them know that. Somewhere deep in the back of the reptilian portion of your mind, you know the way some of these creators present their topics feels weird. You know, a little off, maybe even just straight up. There's something wrong about white people getting paid to spend 3 hours talking about teenagers killing each other like they're a Nat Geo presenter or something. And for the ones bold enough to go walking around with a camera pointed at places and people that they'll never see again after that. But admitting this to yourself means that now you have to confront your own complicity in this perpetuation through your consumption of the content. Again, if there were no market, there would be no media to sell to it. Matter of fact, for the especially edgy among y'all, the taboo of enjoying something that society says that you're probably not supposed to enjoy, it's just as exhilarating, if not more exhilarating than the content itself. Oh, look out, everybody. It's Captain Badass over here spamming the N and F slurs in a Call of Duty chat from the safety of his parents' musty-ass basement. And because this is the internet and everything exists in extremes again, it means admitting this, it means admitting you are a bad person. But again, I don't agree with that. I just don't agree that watching questionable or even downright unethical content makes you an inherently bad person. And I think us insisting on such is what prevents people from confronting their own internalized biases. I think I made it pretty clear that I don't think that you should be watching Trap Lord Ross's content, but I don't think that you're necessarily a bad person for being entertained by it. Like I said, he's good at what he does. That's kind of what makes it such an issue. But the fact that you are entertained is a bad thing, if that makes sense. I can't hold you accountable for what you don't know, let alone something you've been conditioned to do your whole life. So I'm giving y'all a portion of grace by assuming that you don't fully understand the issue here. But I can't give the same level of grace to the people who produce this content. See, we still haven't answered the question of why these channels not only have such large followings, but didn't really blow up like that until they started doing hood stories. Furthermore, we haven't asked ourselves why they've been able to do this with minimal pushback, and when there is pushback, there's a greater pushback against the initial pushback. It's anti-blackness, man. So yeah, if you ask me, Trap Lord Ross is anti-black. He's just not a froth mouth N-word merchant like any number of gaming channels from yesteryear. That said, I don't know if he understands that, and it may be because of, again, the way we talk about racism, which is to say reductive. But what I can tell you is, even if unintentionally, he and his peers have been able to present their content in such a fashion, and just as importantly, with such success, because of societal anti-blackness. And I'm sorry, those channels are way too big for me to assume this hasn't been brought to their attention. But the problem is that they don't care enough to pivot, or at least they don't care about that as much as they do profiting off of black bodies. Dead ones, depending on who we talking about. And all of that is a product of society's anti-blackness. Y'all see what I'm talking about, right? They've been conditioned to think and to act this way, just as you have. Again, anti-blackness doesn't mean that you got to be hostile. I'd argue most times it manifests as apathy toward the black condition. This is reflected in basically every aspect of living, from the disproportionate number of black kids who are misdiagnosed with learning disabilities and then left to their own devices in special ed classes without ever receiving the resources to cope with said disabilities. And again, that's if that diagnosis was accurate to begin with, or to even more disproportionate number of black kids who are suspended from school for the same infractions that non-black kids might not even be chastised for, simply because the school can be bothered with digging as deep with that child as they would with somebody who looks and therefore reminds them of themselves. Instead, they choose to punish them because that's what our education system is, a school to prison pipeline. We gotta teach the N-words how to stay in their place, after all. It's also reflected in black women being more than twice as likely to be victims of IPV than white women. And those numbers only go up for queer black women. So yeah, it ain't just a male on female thing. Or the disproportionate number of black women who die during childbirth or are denied care due to documented implicit biases held by doctors toward black patients. You know, black women supposedly having a much higher pain tolerance than white women, or black women just being inherently uncooperative or whatever. Or the number of black men who are disproportionately diagnosed with schizophrenia or bipolar due to mental health professionals assuming that their very well-founded fears of white supremacist society's inherent hostility towards them is just paranoia and delusions of grandeur, which, if y'all didn't know, are the telltale signs of bipolar and or schizophrenia. What I'm saying is, Trap Lord Ross may not hate black people, but he sure as shuckle don't care about black folk. Not enough to think about how his actions not only exploits us, but uses and perpetuates an image of blackness that promotes apathy toward our condition, all of which, again, are products of anti-blackness. And no, he just glossing over the societal factors that created the condition of his subjects isn't good enough. Not when he's making a profit directly off of said condition. That's why I always appreciated folk like Al Prophet. All of his feature-length Jones spent just as much time not only talking to people on the ground, but talking about the conditions that created the subjects of his videos. He also highlights the hypocrisy of demonizing the methods that they use to overcome it, while not demonizing the system that led them down this path to begin with. But that's the thing. Trap Lord can use these excuses because neither he or the folk who watch his content really care about the conditions that he's highlighting. Not as much as they say they do. Y'all just use it to deflect from criticism, or worse yet, from your own internal ethical dilemmas. And it's not even poverty tourism exclusively, but just the way that whole aesthetic has been commodified in like the last decade or so of this platform. And not just this one, but Twitch and Twitter and all that other stuff. Prison workout with Compton gangbangers. I streamed myself on lockdown for 24 hours, talking shit to gangsters in the hood. What will happen next? Why do titles like these not only consistently get clicks, but are often the most popular videos on these channels? It's because the popular and thereby most profitable depiction of blackness in media is based in anti-black stereotypes. Society told folk like Trap Lord Ross that it's okay to exploit black pain because black people are only halfway human anyway. Again, maybe he doesn't want to understand that. And honestly, I really couldn't care less. But going back to something we covered earlier, the reason poverty tourism exists is because our society tells us that a person's life is only worth as much as the amount of zeros in their bank account. Thus, poor people have no intrinsic value beyond their capacity to enrich the lives of those above them in the social hierarchy. And in this case, that value comes in the way that those folk entertain folk above them in the hierarchy. Likewise, white supremacy says that blackness and thereby black people have no value beyond our capacity to serve the interest of white folks. So it's okay to profit off of the plight of poor black people so long as you call it journalism, because again, nobody would give a damn otherwise. Like, that's literally what y'all have been trying to talk me down with for like ever since I started calling bro on the carpet. Listen, my point isn't really to convince you that Trap Lord Ross is anti-black, because I mean, duh, nigga. All non-black people, hell, most black people are. In fact, the most anti-black people I've ever met in my life have all been niggas. Why else would niggas like Steve Harvey and Thomas Sowell have a platform that's basically just them bitching about baggy jeans and dreadlocks? Anti-blackness is the foundation upon which our society is built. Thus, you cannot just grow out of your racism. You must actively engage your implicit biases in order to unlearn them. And that's not an easy thing. So a lot of people just avoid doing it altogether. I'm gonna wrap this up by using the white man for reference, because nothing I say in this video is really going to matter unless one of them co-signs it. I don't remember who it was that said it, because, you know, all white people look alike and all that, duh, nigga. But either Professor Sky or Fantano made a point about Trap Lord in one of Foreign Man's videos, and I'm glad that they did, because if a white man can clock it, then the rest of y'all niggas really ain't got no excuse.
Trap Lord Ross specifically, I find very interesting.
There isn't like a way that a normal average guy from a small seaside town in England should want to do that.
And then he shot him. He was 16 years old and he was 15 years old, and he bled out on this. The ability to tap into our reptilian desire to dehumanize anybody is what he trades on, but it's also the societal desire to dehumanize black men that he's also tapping into, and I don't think he takes responsibility for it.
When you watch a Trap Lord Ross video, there is, for lack of better phrasing, an exhilaration that he gets talking about black pain, black trauma, black death even. An exhilaration that's always been there, if you ask me.
You're making a decision to invest in the production of images of black pain and dysfunction. And you could pull up a slew of arbitrary rules and excuses of why that's okay in your book and in the book of clearly hundreds of thousands, millions of people. Cool. I still hope somebody I still hope you get shot in the streets doing this one day. You know what I'm saying? Find a way to cleverly Babilla. Find a way to cleverly edit around that, so I don't get in trouble.
It goes back to something that I talked about earlier with the roller coaster and scary movie analogy. Trap Lord's fascination with black art was never necessarily with the art itself, if you ask me, but the trauma that informs it. And you can see that the bigger his audience became, the more unrepentant he became about that part of his fascination. You know, the whole power only makes you more of what you already are and whatnot. Again, he basically said this himself in a failed attempt to defend his BS.
I mean, you might laugh because I'm a white liberal who's going to say this, but like, Black Lives Matter. And the first time I ever thought Black Lives Matter was 911 is a joke by Public Enemy, because like I didn't even understand, like I didn't understand the song. I was like, why are they mad at ambulances? Who could possibly have a problem? And then eventually I came to understand that there's a systemic inequality in ambulances, and that's so much less charged than the police. Like that's like there's no one, you don't think there's any evil person abusing power driving an ambulance. So like if the term Black Lives Matter weren't so, you know, co-opted and whatever, made by M&Ms and stuff, like just that idea, like if that idea worked at all or has any hold on anyone's mind, you know, like every single one of these people is a human being. And definitely the technological systems that are in place are encouraging violence.
People like Trap Law Ross and all of them, even, you know, supposedly, you know, hip hop blogs like Rap House TV and Say Cheese that all operate out of a call center in Mumbai somewhere, are exactly what I mean about loving everything about black people except black people. But specifically when it comes to people like Trap Lord, there's something even more sinister afoot with his BS, if you ask me. In a word, it's schadenfreude. Clarence put up a definition for all of the hood niggas in the audience. Trap Lord isn't interested in platforming black stories. He's interested in profiting off of black death, and from a far enough distance that he doesn't have to see, let alone feel the consequences of his actions. And that makes him the most vile of these folk, in my opinion. Maybe I am giving a little too much grace to all of the other folk, but he specifically is the only one who seems to actively enjoy what he does. He doesn't just exploit black trauma, he revels in it, and that's especially despicable to me. But again, he individually isn't the problem, because if it weren't him, it'd be somebody else. Just pointing the finger at one skinny white man doesn't answer the question of how he even came to such prominence on this platform to begin with. These channels exist because there is a market for black pain. There always has been, and there always will be, because of, again, anti-blackness. Again, you don't have to hate us to be amused by our pain, and I hope I don't need to explain why that in itself is a problem. When I see a Trap Lord Ross thumbnail, all I can see is those pictures of black kids in cages in a Belgian zoo. When I see a Brandon Buckingham video, all I see is those pictures of lynch mobs looking gleefully at the camera while they point to the black body swinging above them. I see the dehumanization of black people by white supremacy and the sick pleasure that some folk get from that. It reminds me that less than 200 years ago, the law didn't consider me fully human, and that the society that made those laws still doesn't. I and my peers have accused Trap Lord of being everything from a fed to a culture vulture, and yeah, none of that is wrong, but it really undersells the danger that he poses. Trap Lord Ross is a black murder merchant, a profiteer of black pain. But again, you got to ask yourself, what part did we play in him getting to this point to begin with? If you ask me, all of it. And that's the real problem. I'm really not going to try to convince y'all to stop watching his slop, because, you know, y'all are going to do what y'all want to anyway. I mean, this is a free country after all, or at least it will be for the next few months until SCOTUS caves completely to the big orange baby in office right now. I am not at all the first person to call these channels on the carpet, and I'm not merely calling them out for culture vulturing. Again, if you ask me, these channels are something different, something worse. And I just want y'all to be aware of how and why I feel like they need to be excised. It is to make y'all aware. It is to wake some of y'all up to the reality. Y'all have probably heard me and others call Trap Lord and Vlad and et al. Feds. Most of y'all think you know what that means when I use it, but you really don't. See, when I call these folk feds, what I really mean is, just like the government has historically, these folks have made a living off of black bodies, specifically off of black pain and trauma. Again, you got to ask yourself, how much do you care, though? Is it enough to starve them out? I don't know, dog. We'll see based on how viral the skinny white man's next video goes. Yeah, but Lord knows y'all love a snuff film, so I ain't really counting on it. Again, BET, call me, man.